Have you ever torn something down, only to wish you had left it untouched? That's exactly what happened to us. For years, that old wall stood silently inside the house, cracked and worn, hiding nothing more than dust, or so we thought. But the day we knocked it down, the house changed forever. The moment the bricks crumbled, the silence was broken by knocking. Not from us, from the other side. Slow, deliberate, and chilling, like someone trapped, answering back. We froze, every hair on our skin standing on end, because there was nothing there, just empty space. Or at least it should have been empty. What we uncovered was not just bricks and mortar. It was a secret buried for decades, and once we touched it, we could never turn back. This was not just a wall, it was a warning. The house was never meant to feel like home. From the very first day we stepped inside, something about it felt wrong. The air was heavy, the silence too sharp. Yet nothing seemed out of place. Just an old house with peeling paint and long-forgotten rooms. At least, that's what we convinced ourselves. But one wall stood out. Unlike the rest, it seemed newer, out of place, as though it had been built not to support the house, but to hide something inside it. For months, we ignored it. We told ourselves it was nothing. Until the night the knocking began. It started faint, almost like the settling of wood, but too deliberate, too human. We couldn't explain it. And when the sound grew stronger, we made the worst decision of our lives. We tore the wall down. What we found was not freedom from fear, but the beginning of a nightmare. Because some walls are built for protection, not for decoration. And the moment we broke it, something on the other side finally had a way out. When we first moved into the house, it was supposed to be a fresh start. The neighborhood was quiet. The rent was low. To be true. At first glance, it was just another aging home with creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and windows that rattled in the wind. But we quickly noticed how the atmosphere pressed down on us, like an invisible weight we couldn't shake off. The strangest part was the wall in the hallway. While most of the house carried decades of wear, this one section looked different, newer, smoother, and oddly placed. It didn't match the rest of the design. To most people, it would mean nothing. To us, it became an unspoken curiosity, something we quietly avoided, as if we already knew we didn't want to disturb it. At night, the wall almost seemed to breathe. Shadows fell across it in unnatural patterns, as though light bent differently there. Sometimes, when the house grew silent, I swore I could hear the faintest sound, like a whisper pressed into stone. But every time I mentioned it, the others brushed it off as imagination. Weeks passed, and the doors creaked open when no one touched them. The air turned icy cold in the hallway, so much that we'd rush past it without a word. Pets refused to go near the wall. Our dog would bark and whine whenever we lingered too long in that space. These small things piled up, shaping an unease that became impossible to ignore. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the wall seemed to groan. Not the house, the wall itself. A long, thick, pale, tough, dark taste for that wall. Low sound that vibrated faintly under my fingertips when I touched the plaster. That was when I realized it wasn't just a wall. Something was sealed inside. The next morning, we tried to convince ourselves it was just the storm playing tricks. But the feeling never left us. My brother became obsessed, running his hands along the surface, knocking at different spots as though he expected an answer. My mother warned us not to tamper with it, her voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. It was my brother who finally made the decision. He brought home tools, determined to chip away at the mystery. He claimed it was probably an old storage space, maybe even something valuable hidden inside. The thought of treasure almost made us laugh, breaking the heaviness of our fear for a moment. But deep down, none of us truly believed that. We gathered that night, standing in front of the wall, hesitant, yet drawn to it as if under a spell. The storm outside had quieted, leaving behind an unnatural stillness that seeped into the house. Each of us held our breath as the first strike of the hammer echoed through the hallway. The sound was louder than it should have been, as if the wall amplified every blow. Plaster cracked, dust clouded the air, and with every strike, the house seemed to grow colder. When the first brick loosened, we leaned in, expecting darkness behind it. But instead, what we heard froze us where we stood. A knock, not random, not accidental. A knock that came from the other side. Slow, hollow, deliberate. And in that moment, we understood something terrifying. The wall wasn't hiding treasure. It was holding something in. The knock we heard that night changed everything. At first, we froze, each of us staring at the wall as if we hadn't really heard it. Maybe it was just the wood settling, maybe a trick of the imagination. But then it came again. Knock. Slow. Deliberate. This time, the sound echoed deep within the wall. Too sharp to be dismissed. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, as if someone or something was answering us. My brother's hand tightened around the hammer, his knuckles turning white. For the first time, he didn't look curious. He looked afraid. No one spoke. The silence between knocks stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, against all reason, my brother raised the hammer again and struck the plaster. The wall groaned. 3 knocks. Louder. Closer. My mother gasped, clutching her rosary so tightly, the beads left marks in her palm. She begged us to stop, her voice trembling as she said the wall wasn't meant to be opened. But the fear that had grown inside us for weeks was tangled with a darker force. Curiosity. We couldn't walk away now, not after hearing proof that something was on the other side. With every strike, the wall began to crumble. Chunks of plaster fell away. We uncovered the truth, and the once smooth surface revealed older, uneven layers beneath. It wasn't built as part of the house. It was added later, hastily, like a prison wall meant to hide something in plain sight. The knocking grew violent. At first, it followed the rhythm of the hammer, as if mocking us. Then it turned erratic, desperate, slamming so hard the vibrations rattled the floor. Each strike made the air colder, heavy, with the air on the other side rushed out like a breath held for decades. It smelled of mildew, old wood, and something foul we couldn't place. A thick darkness pooled within, deeper than the small cavity should have held. My brother shoved a flashlight through the hole. The beam cut into the void, but revealed only stone, dust, and rotting boards. Just when we thought it was nothing but emptiness, the light caught something. Scratches etched deep into the stone. Long, desperate marks, as if fingernails had clawed against it for years. Someone was inside, my sister whispered, her face pale. That was when the knocking stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the noise, heavy and unnatural. We waited, ears straining, hearts pounding, but nothing came. My brother, defiant, widened the hole enough to crawl through. We tried to stop him. My mother clung to his arm, begging, tears streaming down her face. But he shook her off and slid into the darkness. Dot, the beam of the flashlight trembled as he moved deeper. Seconds passed. Then minutes. We called his name. No answer. Then, knock. This time, it came not from the wall, but from behind us. The opposite side of the hallway. Slow, measured, as if the house itself was alive, and we had just awakened it. Panic erupted. My mother screamed his name, and the rest of us clawed at the wall, widening the hole in desperation. Finally, with a crash, a large section gave way, and he stumbled out, pale and trembling, eyes wide with terror. "There's something in there," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It knows we opened it." And then, before we could ask more, the knocking resumed. This time, from every wall around us. That night marked the beginning of something like the gentle tap of a finger against wood. Then they would grow louder, echoing through every corner of the house, until it felt like we were trapped inside a giant drum. The family tried to pretend it wasn't happening. My mother prayed louder than the noise, her rosary beads clicking furiously as she whispered words of protection. My sister refused to sleep alone, dragging her blanket into the living room, night after night. My brother, though he had been the boldest before, now avoided the hallway completely, his eyes darting nervously whenever he had to pass it. I remember one night most vividly. It was close to 2 a.m. The storm outside lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a warning. Just as I started to drift off to sleep, the knocking began. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it wasn't random. Before a new pattern started. 3 sharp knocks. Silence. 2 slow knocks. Silence. Then, one final, heavy strike that shook the wall beside my bed. I froze, terrified to breathe, terrified that whatever was knocking was listening. By morning, the air in the house felt heavy, as if the walls had absorbed the night's terror and were waiting to release it again. We told ourselves it was imagination, or perhaps vibrations from outside. But deep down, none of us believed that. The nights grew worse. Shadows crept across the walls, twisting into shapes that didn't belong to any of us. Doors slammed without warning, sending us running into each other's arms. Objects shifted subtly. A chair moved an inch overnight. A picture frame turned face down. Keys vanishing, only to reappear in impossible places. The dog grew restless. One evening, determined to end the madness, my brother set up a camera facing the broken wall. He wanted proof, something solid, to explain the nightmare we were living in. We all gathered the next morning to watch the footage. At first, it showed nothing but shadows and dust. Hours passed in silence. Then, just after 1:15 a.m., the knocking began. The sound filled the speakers, sharp and unnatural. But it wasn't the sound that froze us. It was the image. On the screen, the flashlight beam flickered against the broken wall, though no one had touched it. A dark shape moved across the frame, low to the ground, crawling. For a moment, it seemed to turn toward the camera, and 2 faint, glimmering points, eyes, stared directly at us. Then the feed cut to static. My brother shut the laptop violently. The days that followed were filled with silence, but not the kind that comforts. It was the silence of a predator, watching, waiting. The knocks didn't always come at night anymore. Sometimes they echoed faintly in the afternoon, when sunlight should have driven away fear. They followed us from room to room, reminding us that nowhere inside the house was safe. My mother was the first to demand answers. She refused to let her family crumble without knowing what had been unleashed. She visited the town's small library, searching through dusty archives of property records and forgotten newspapers. When she came back, her face was pale and her hands trembled as she spread the yellowed papers across the kitchen table. "This house," she whispered, "wasn't just abandoned. It was sealed." According to old reports, decades ago, the house had belonged to a man named Elias Marrow, a recluse, feared by neighbors. Odd hours of cries heard in the dead of night. Children dared each other to run past the property, but no one dared to knock on the door. The most disturbing record, though, came from a police report. One night, screams were heard from inside the house. By the time authorities arrived, Elias was gone. Inside, they found claw marks in the hallway walls and a single room that had been hastily bricked up. No bodies were ever recovered. The house was deemed cursed and was left to rot until years later, someone patched it up and sold it cheap to us. We sat frozen around the table as my mother read the last line aloud. The wall was not built to keep people out. It was built to keep something in. That night, the atmosphere in the house grew unbearable. The temperature dropped so low we could see our breath fogging in front of us. Whispers slid through the air, weaving between us. That wasn't human. Determined to know more, my brother and I returned to the broken wall. With trembling hands, we held up lanterns and studied the cavity we had uncovered. The claw marks we'd seen before seemed endless now, overlapping and jagged, as if generations of hands had clawed against the stone. But there was something else. Symbols carved into the bricks. Strange runes neither of us recognized. They pulsed faintly in the flickering light, as if alive. Behind a loose stone, we discovered something wrapped in brittle cloth. Carefully, we pulled it free, and the fabric disintegrated in our hands. Inside was a small journal, its leather cover cracked with age. The pages, though faded, carried Elias Marrow's handwriting. The entries grew more disturbing with each line. At first, he wrote of loneliness, of wanting company, then of voices speaking from the walls, promising him power, whispering secrets. Finally, the entries turned into madness. Descriptions of feeding the voice, of giving it what it asked for. The last entry chilled us to the core. It is no longer behind the wall. It is inside me. As we read, the knocking began again. Slow, mocking. This time, it came from the floor beneath us. The journal slipped from my brother's hands, falling open on the last page. Scrawled in red ink, or perhaps something far worse, were the words, "The wall must never be broken." But it was too late. We already had. The journal should have been enough to make us flee. But by then, it was already too late. The house wasn't just haunted, it was awake. Whatever had been sealed inside the wall had seeped into every corner, spreading like smoke through the halls, claiming the house as its own. The first signs came subtly. A glass sliding across the kitchen counter, with no one near it. Curtains swaying though the windows were shut. Whispers echoing faintly in rooms we weren't even in. But the truth grew harder to ignore. One night, my sister screamed so loudly, we all rushed into her room. She sat frozen in bed, pointing toward the far corner. At first, we saw nothing. Then, the shadows seemed to shift, pulling together into the outline of a figure. Tall, thin, unnaturally still. It stood watching her, head tilted, as though studying prey. When we turned on the light, it vanished, leaving only the lingering stench of rotting earth. The knocking followed us constantly now, no longer bound to the wall. It came from the ceiling above us, the floors beneath us, even from inside closets. Once, as my brother opened a cupboard, the door slammed shut with such force that his hand bled where it caught his skin. He swore he felt fingers, cold, bony fingers, pushing against the door from the other side. Sleep became impossible. My mother's prayers grew hoarse, her voice breaking as she begged for protection. Yet the rosary in her hand would landing on the floor as though yanked from her grasp. My sister began speaking in her sleep, muttering words in a language none of us understood. Sometimes she would laugh, a deep, guttural laugh that did not belong to her. The worst came one night when we all gathered in the living room, too terrified to stay alone in our rooms. The air grew heavy, pressing down on us like a weight. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. A knocking began in every direction. Walls, ceiling, floor, all at once, until it felt like we were trapped in a coffin being hammered shut. In the chaos, something scraped across the floor. We turned the flashlight on, just in time to see the dining table dragging itself across the room. Chairs tumbling aside, as though shoved by invisible hands. My sister cried out, clinging to my mother, while my brother tried to hold the door shut against it. Was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. But soon it grew louder, clearer, echoing through every wall, a voice deep and hollow, speaking our names one by one. The sound reverberated in our skulls, crawling under our skin. It didn't just speak, it mocked us, repeated our cries, our prayers, twisted them into cruel laughter. When the lights finally flickered back on, everything was still. The table was back in place. The door no longer shook. But on the wall, near the hallway, letters had been carved. We huddled in the living room, clutching flashlights, waiting for whatever came next. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of damp earth and burning wood. Though no fire was lit, Every creak of the house set our nerves on edge. Then, just past midnight, the knocking began again. But this time, it wasn't just knocks. It was footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving across the upstairs hallway. Slow at first, then faster. Pounding as though someone or something was running straight toward us. We bolted upright, the sound thundering down the stairs. Closer and closer until it stopped at the edge of the living room. The flashlight beam shook in my brother's trembling hand as he aimed it toward the doorway. For a moment, there was nothing. Then the light caught it. A figure. Gaunt, twisted, and then it smiled. The smile was wrong. Too wide, too human and inhuman at the same time. Before we could move, the creature lunged. The lights exploded, plunging us into darkness as the room erupted in chaos. Chairs toppled, glass shattered, and screams filled the air. I felt cold fingers graze my arm, pulling, clawing, before my brother dragged me away. We ran. Up the stairs, down the hallway, desperate to find safety in a house that had none. Doors slammed shut on their own, forcing us back toward the broken wall. The knocking started again, louder than ever, pounding from inside the cavity we had opened, as if more than one thing was trying to get out. My mother fell to her knees, clutching the journal we had found, crying prayers into the darkness. But her words were drowned out by the voices. They came from every wall, every floorboard, to seal the wall again. He grabbed bricks and plaster from the rubble, his hands shaking as he tried to patch the opening. The rest of us joined, fumbling, sobbing, stacking broken pieces with frantic speed. The entity shrieked, a sound so piercing it rattled our bones. The walls trembled, dust pouring from the ceiling as the creature hurled itself at us. Every impact shook the floor, but still we worked, shoving pieces back into place, smearing plaster with trembling hands. Finally, with one last strike of the hammer, the wall closed. The air went still. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable, but it was silence all the same. The house, once roaring with rage, had gone quiet. We collapsed, exhausted, trembling, too afraid to believe it was truly over. We left the house the next morning. We never returned, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear it. Knock. Soft. Patient. Can you ever really lock it away again? We thought sealing the wall again would end the nightmare, but deep down, we knew the truth. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The house may have fallen silent, but silence does not mean safety. It only means waiting. When we left, we told no one the real reason. They said the house was too old, too broken to live in. But sometimes, when I catch a faint knock in the middle of the night, I wonder if it followed us. Maybe the wall wasn't built to trap something inside the house at all. Maybe it was built to protect the world outside. And now, because of us, that protection is gone. If you ever move into an old house, pay attention to the walls that don't belong, to the spaces that feel too heavy, too wrong. Because walls don't just divide rooms. Sometimes they divide worlds. And if you ever hear knocking, don't answer.